I met my ex when we were both in college. I was 24 at the time, and she was 22. Before meeting her, I had not dated much. I had just ended a difficult one-year relationship that had left me drained but on decent terms with the other person. My ex before her struggled with severe depression, and even though I cared about her deeply, her emotional state became too much for me to handle. I consider myself pretty empathetic, and her sadness always seemed to weigh me down. In the end, I decided to let her go for both our sakes. Not long after, my next relationship began. She and I lived in the same apartment complex, and she made the first move. At the start, I had gone out of my way to lend her a hand with a few things, and one day she asked me for a ride. That moment sparked a connection that grew into a friendship and eventually a relationship. I started spending hours with her, whether at her apartment or keeping her company at the sandwich shop where she worked until closing time. She had taken a break from school, partly because of depression and partly due to a failed engagement from the year before. Though, from what I gathered, she never did finish college, even after transferring to other universities. We bonded over her story about being betrayed and cheated on by her ex-fiancé. Looking back, I question how much of that story was true, but at the time, it made us closer. Before long, we were inseparable. After only 2 months of being friends with benefits, she introduced me to her parents. After a few months, I realized I wanted something more serious. I had no interest in dating anyone else, so I asked her to be my girlfriend. She turned me down, saying she was not ready because of her past engagement. That should have been a red flag, but I ignored it, convincing myself it was understandable. We kept seeing each other exclusively, neither of us dated anyone else. But every time I brought up defining our relationship, she resisted. At first, everything seemed perfect. We liked the same things, shared similar goals, and just clicked. But sometimes, I noticed subtle digs she would make about me. She would compare me to her exes or say something that stung in the guise of a joke. We would argue over the smallest things, and while I tried to calm things down, it rarely worked. When she stormed out of my apartment, I would chase after her, only for her to accuse me of not giving her space. If I stayed put the next time, she would say I did not care enough to follow her. She also began to mess with my perception of events, making me doubt things I clearly remembered. I did not know it was called gaslighting at the time, but that is exactly what it was. Despite all of this, I stayed because I was in love. My friends would often tell me I deserved better, that she was not treating me right, but I brushed off their concerns. Looking back, I should have listened to them. They only wanted the best for me. After a year of dating, I still wanted us to be an official couple. She kept refusing, saying she was not ready, but she would also tell me I was the best guy she had ever been with. All her friends knew we were together, but I could not stand being around them. They seemed cliquish and judgmental. Plus, they had a cat, and I am allergic, so I often used that as an excuse to avoid their gatherings. We spent a lot of time together regardless. She called me every night, and we would stay on the phone until one of us fell asleep. She said my voice comforted her and helped her sleep better because of her depression. Despite some good times, things turned sour occasionally. Once, she slapped me, twice actually. She claimed it was a joke, but I did not find it funny. I told her it was disrespectful, especially since I would never do something like that to her. During one argument, she casually mentioned her roommate knew guys in the complex who would be willing to hook up with her, saying, "I do not really need you." Eventually, after more than a year of dating, she agreed to make things official. Oddly, she kept it a secret from everyone except her family. At the time, I was just happy to finally have the relationship I wanted, so I ignored how strange that was. I will admit, I was not a perfect boyfriend. I dealt with depression myself, and the stress of school, work, family, and our relationship often overwhelmed me. Sometimes I would lash out, not physically, but I would point out the hurtful things she had done. We broke up several times, sometimes because of me and other times because of her, but we always ended up back together. Once, I did something manipulative. I hurt myself to show her how much our fights affected me. It was wrong, but at the time, I was desperate and hurting. She had self-harmed before and even talked about feeling suicidal while we were together, so the idea probably came from her. Despite everything, I truly loved her. We talked about marriage, kids, and our future together. She moved twice during our time together, once to an apartment nearby and later back to her parents' house an hour away. When she moved to the nearby apartment, she threw a party. None of her friends stayed to help clean up, but I did. She told me that moment proved I would make a good husband. After she moved back to her parents' place, I visited her almost every week. Still, I started to notice her becoming more distant. Her replies to my texts and calls slowed down, but if she reached out to me, she expected a quick response. No matter the time, even at 1 in the morning, I would go to her if she needed me, even if I had school or work early the next day. After a couple of months, I started bringing up the idea of getting engaged. But just like before with the girlfriend-boyfriend situation, she resisted. She used her depression from her previous relationship as a reason to delay, and then she dropped another bombshell. She wanted us to go back to casually dating. Looking back, I cannot believe I agreed to it, but at the time, I thought this would somehow prove my commitment to her, that I was the right guy. Over the next few months, she began going on dates with other people. The strange part was that she would tell me about these dates and even compare those guys to me, always saying I was better. Meanwhile, I stayed loyal. I was too in love to see how one-sided it all was. I did tell her, though, that if she found someone she truly wanted to pursue, I would end things so she could move on with him. Eventually, after hearing my friends and family voice their concerns, something clicked for me. Why was I doing all this for someone who was not even my girlfriend anymore? I confronted her, and we both agreed to stop any physical relationship until we were exclusive again. But that agreement did not last long. We would still go on dates, and she would guilt or pressure me into crossing that line. Every time, I would cave in, and she would immediately turn it around on me, getting angry and asking why I could not resist her or why I did not stop her. It was emotionally exhausting. She became cruel, saying things that cut deep. The worst was when she told me that if she ever got pregnant, she would not tell me and would make all the decisions about the baby on her own. That crushed me because I have always dreamed of being a father and would never abandon my child. Still, instead of walking away, we would argue and then patch things up, like we always did. Despite everything, we still talked about a future together. She would see a mixed-race baby, I am Latino, and she is white, and gush about how adorable the baby was, saying it could have been ours. When she was feeling low, she would call me, asking, "Would you still marry me?" And every time, I would reassure her, saying, "Of course I would. I love you." Things finally started to unravel around Christmas. I had gone to Florida to visit my brother, and she became unusually distant. I would text her, and she would not reply. Calls went unanswered, too. Then, one night, she called out of the blue, not to catch up, but to ask if I had a specific movie on DVD. When I asked why, she said she wanted to watch it with her family. Something felt off, but I could not put my finger on it. When I got back from vacation and started the new semester, she showed up at my university one day, saying she had lost her Fitbit and needed my help to find it. I helped her, and we spent some time together, but I could tell something had changed. Before leaving, she asked me to visit her parents' house in 2 days because she needed to talk to me. At that moment, I knew what was coming. I talked to my friends and braced myself for the worst. When I arrived at her parents' house, it was late. She had asked me to come at 10 o'clock at night. She got into my car, and we talked for about half an hour. She told me she no longer wanted to date me. I stayed calm and told her I had felt her pulling away. I asked if there was someone else, but she denied it, saying she just felt we were not right for each other anymore. Then she said things that completely shattered me. She admitted she had never seen me as husband material. She claimed she never truly believed we would get married or have kids, that she had known it all along. And then she said something I will never forget, that one of the reasons she did not want to be with me was that our children would not look like her, because of our racial differences. The irony is that she always presented herself as progressive and open-minded. Hearing her say that, after all the times we had talked about marriage and kids, was a gut punch. I told her I loved her but agreed we were done. We decided on no contact. She insisted on blocking me on Facebook, saying she knew I would not be able to keep her blocked, so it was better if she did it. I agreed. We did not block each other on our phones, though, in case of emergencies, since I had no family in the state. Driving away that night, I felt a mix of sadness and relief, as if a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The next month was a struggle. Nights were the hardest. I realized just how dependent I had become on her, on the nightly phone calls, on her presence in my life. I felt isolated, and there were many nights where I cried alone on my bedroom floor. But I threw myself into my work, my studies, and my friendships. Slowly, I began to rebuild my sense of self. About a month later, I got a call from her early in the morning. Thinking it might be an emergency, I answered. But it was not. At first, it seemed like a butt dial, which felt strange since we had not spoken in a month. What were the odds of her accidentally calling me? I could hear bits and pieces of a conversation in the background. Her voice was unmistakable, but there was another voice, a man's voice, I did not recognize. I caught a mention of snow and, unless I imagined it, my name. Then the call abruptly ended. Curiosity got the better of me. I reached out to a few mutual friends and found out she had started seeing someone new. Against my better judgment, I messaged her, asking if she was okay. It took her a few days to reply, and when she did, she said she had indeed but dialed me but had also been wanting to talk. She told me she missed my friendship, and for a little while, our conversation felt like old times. Then she casually mentioned she was seeing someone. I told her I already knew, and she asked how I found out. I explained that friends had told me. By this point, I had already seen a picture of the guy. She started talking about him, mostly pointing out his flaws, which struck me as odd. I just listened, trying to make sense of it all, but something about it felt off. She mentioned his hair, and I accidentally said, "Yeah, it is a bit unusual," thinking she was talking about how it looked now. But she was actually referring to how it looked years ago, and she immediately questioned how I would know that. I awkwardly backtracked, saying I had misunderstood. Then she brought up how she had been getting random friend requests on Facebook lately and asked if it was me. It was not, but the insinuation irritated me. We wrapped up the conversation soon after. By then, I realized I did not want to keep talking to her. The next day, I messaged her, saying I enjoyed catching up but felt it was best if we stuck to not speaking. She agreed, and I blocked her number for good measure. About a week later, while I was on campus, I noticed I had a voicemail, even though my phone had not rung. It was from her. She said she had stopped by my house to drop off some things. I was livid. For one, I had told her we were done communicating, and second, I could not think of anything so important that she needed to return it. To make it worse, she had left the items at my front door when no one was home. Frustrated, I decided to send her an email. In it, I laid everything out. I told her I had loved her deeply but that she had lied to and mistreated me. I thanked her parents for their kindness. They had always been supportive and often praised me as a great boyfriend. Then I firmly told her I wanted no further contact of any kind. I explained that I had blocked her number and added that while we lived about an hour apart, there was always a chance we might run into each other because of mutual friends. I wrote, "How you treat me is how I will treat you. If you treat me like a friend, I will treat you like a friend. If you treat me like an enemy, I will treat you like an enemy. And if you treat me like I do not exist, I will do the same." I hit send, thinking that would be the end of it. I could not have been more wrong. A few days later, I received an email, not from her, but from her dad. Her dad, a former Marine and lawyer, had always been someone I respected. So, I was stunned when I read his message. He told me to leave his daughter alone and accused me of stalking her. He claimed I had created fake Facebook accounts to cyberstalk her, which was not true. Sure, I had glanced at her profile through a mutual friend's account once or twice, but that was it. He even quoted the part of my email where I mentioned treating her the way she treated me, saying it sounded like a threat. He ended the email by warning me to stay away or face a restraining order. I was floored. This was the same man who had once told me I was an amazing boyfriend. Now he was accusing me of things I had not done. I spoke to a few people for advice and, drawing from what I had learned in my law courses at university, wrote back. I told him plainly that I wanted nothing to do with his daughter. I pointed out that she had been the one to reinitiate contact, even going so far as to visit my house without my permission. I stated that his claims were baseless and that no judge would grant a restraining order on such flimsy accusations. I ended by asking him to never contact me again, promising to do the same. That was when I started questioning everything. What kind of stories was she telling people about me? What narrative was she spinning to make me look like the bad guy? When I told some of my friends about what had happened, they were as shocked as I was. One of them said, "You dodged a nuke," and I could not help but agree. I thought that would be the end of it. But like I said, this is a cheating story, a long one at that, and there was still more to come. We had broken up in January, and just after the first week of April, I got a message from a friend while I was at work. They told me that my ex had gotten engaged. 3 months. It had been only 3 months since we ended things, and I was floored. For someone who constantly complained about how hard relationships were because of her cheating, abusive ex-fiancé, this felt like whiplash. Something just did not add up. Then my friend mentioned a comment someone had left on her engagement announcement, congratulating her, and saying they were glad to have helped bring them together back in November. The same November when she and I were still dating. Technically, we were not exclusive at that point, but I had given her multiple chances to come clean about seeing someone else, and she had lied. To me, that was cheating. I was livid, but at the same time, everything started to click. That was why she had grown distant at Christmas. That was who she had really wanted to watch that movie with. It hurt, but I did my best to move on with my life. I was still wrestling with depression and trust issues though. Talking to friends and some people at church helped a bit, but the more I opened up, the more I learned about her. People who had known her but did not know we had dated began sharing stories, stuff I probably should not have heard but did anyway. They told me about all the nasty things she had said about others, and it became clear to me that she had never really cared about me. She just wanted someone to care for her until something better came along. That realization hit hard, but it also brought clarity. I had fallen in love not with who she was but with who she pretended to be. She had heard about me, figured out I was a nice, empathetic guy, and mirrored my personality back at me. I thought I was dating someone who shared my values, but I was really just dealing with a narcissist. Oddly enough, that understanding helped me learn a lot about myself. I realized I care too much, love too deeply, and need to be more cautious about who I give my heart to. Lesson learned. 6 months passed. I had not run into her, though I heard she had moved back to my city with her new husband. So much for me being the stalker, right? A few friends had run-ins with her though, and one of them, Danny Boy, bless him, managed to embarrass her with a hilariously inappropriate innuendo about something from her past. Then came the day of a friend's wedding. I could not make it to the ceremony, but I went to the reception. I had just finished giving a small, playful speech, poking fun at the groom for his ridiculously loud laugh, when a mutual friend walked into the room. And right behind her was my ex, her husband trailing behind. Our eyes met just as she was about to enter the room. In that instant she stopped, turned to her husband, and pushed him back into the hallway before disappearing herself. I was so taken aback that I had to step outside to collect my thoughts. It was not like I still had feelings for her, but the shock of seeing her again hit me harder than I expected. After a few minutes, I went back inside. Oddly enough, she and her husband never re-entered the room. Curious, I asked my friend if he had invited her. He had, but he shrugged off my reaction, saying he had not thought it would be a big deal. Fair enough, He was more of a mutual acquaintance than a close friend. Time passed, and the newlyweds were about to have their first dance. As we were clearing chairs to make space, I happened to be near a door when my ex came through it. She saw me standing right there, froze, and immediately bolted to the other side of the room, dragging her husband along. We avoided each other for the rest of the reception, except for a couple of awkward glances. But in that moment, something shifted for me. For months after the breakup, I had felt broken, like a part of me was missing. But seeing her reaction, how ashamed she seemed to be, made me feel whole again. For the first time in a long time, I felt happy. Even though she was married and I was still single, I knew I had won the breakup. She could not even look me in the eye, while I had nothing to hide and no guilt weighing me down. My conscience was clear. Now here I am, over 4 years later, writing this. I am still single, but I am content with where I am in life. And Maddie, if you ever stumble across this, here is my message to you: screw you. I am the one who finished university. You are just a housewife. After all that big talk about changing the world, the only thing you are ever going to change is diapers. You are nothing but a liar and a cheat. Thanks for reading.